There you go. Okay, we're now recording. Um, I'm speaking today with Carlos Eduardo Lins da Silva from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Dr. Lins da Silva is the editor of the journal called Política Externa, which is sort of like foreign policy or foreign affairs in Brazil. He's been a journalist, he's been a scholar, he's been a political counselor, and now he is also a global fellow for the Woodrow Wilson International Center in Washington, D.C. Carlos Eduardo, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Joe. I'm fine, and you?
I'm delighted. I'd like to speak for a few minutes today about the political and economic situation in Brazil. We haven't heard from you on World Review or GIS for a while, so I thought it would be helpful to sort of fill in some general details. In June, the government of Dilma Rousseff was very upset by the street demonstrations in major cities throughout Brazil, and it looked as if her government was unprepared to deal with them. But now, perhaps she's regained her popularity. What is your view? Is she doing a good job?
She's doing a relatively good job. The problem is that when you compare her with Lula, it's a huge difference because she doesn't have the charisma, she doesn't have the personality that President Lula did. So she has had some strength, especially with businessmen, entrepreneurs, and also politicians, congressmen, because of her difficulties with dialogue with these sectors. But I think she's doing a relatively good job, and she is by far the front runner for the election next year.
Is there any serious opposition to her next year in the elections?
The most serious opposition is the one that's led by Marina Silva, a former Minister of Environment in Brazil. She had 20% of the votes in the last presidential election, running with the Green Party, which was very small and very uh, badly organized throughout the country. But because of legal problems, she was not able to form a new party as she wished, and she's not going to run for the presidency. But maybe she can be the running mate of Governor Eduardo Campos of Pernambuco. Eduardo Campos and Marina Silva can be a difficult competitor for Dilma, but that's not shown yet in the polls.
So she should have relatively easy route to re-election next year.
It depends very much on what happens, Joe. Of course, nobody predicted that the June demonstrations could happen with such intensity as they did. So I don't know if this kind of demonstrations happen again, if some other economic problem is too serious, or if some political problem that cannot be foreseen just now happen, if this can change the picture. But with the elements we have now, she is the front runner.
Now, the street demonstrations complained about essentially three things. First of all, that the government was spending too much money to prepare for the World Cup, and that government was not spending enough money on social programs to relieve inequality. And the third was corruption. Let's talk about the World Cup. Everybody around the world is anxious to know whether or not Brazil's going to be ready to receive us as we all travel to watch the wonderful game at Jogo Lindo.
It will be read.
Good.
What happened it was more or less expectable because it happened other times in an event like that in Brazil. The thing is, Brazilians like to let everything to be done at the last minute, and this is a cultural trait. Wouldn't change and didn't change. But the reason why I think the cut was one of the reasons for the demonstrations is that, as you know, FIFA, the international organization that rules soccer, has the standards of quality that are very, very high for everything that has to deal with the game. So it became very common in Brazil to talk about the FIFA standard. So everything that's for the cup is beautiful, is wonderful, is the state of the art. So people started saying, why can't we have schools people standards? Why can't we have people standards for our hospitals, for our public transportation? And this was really, I think, what triggered the demonstrations. People comparing, because in July, June, July, we had the Confederations Cup, which is a kind of a preview of the World Cup. And everything was beautiful for the players and the directors of the teams that came to Brazil. And people started asking why they can and we cannot. So this, I think, was one of the reasons.
Well, what about you mentioned medicine and health? That was one of the first reactions by the Dilma government to bring in doctors, even from Cuba and other schools. What is the program called? More doctors, mais médicos?
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. More doctors.
yeah. How does that program work? Do you think that's having a good effect?
I don't know if it's having a good effect. I think so, but it was a big hit in terms of public opinion for President Rousseff and her government. 86% of the people approved it.
Wow, that's tremendous. Now you've got Cuban doctors all over Latin America. It's Cuba's principal export now that sugar is not so profitable. Listen, concerned with the Brazilian economy, up until last year, Brazil was one of the BRICS. Brazil was one of the fastest growing economies in emerging markets in the world, being compared to China and India and so on. India, as we know, has fallen flat. Even China's income per capita is growing slower this year than last. And in Brazil, if I recall, 2012 was a particularly slow year for the economy. How are things looking today?
I think things are looking as they always did. I never bought the idea that Brazil could become a China. We have a structural problem that will not be solved and that force us to have a kind of growth that's more or less 2.5% a year in the GDP. Sometimes we grow very much, as we did in 2011, but this is not sustainable because there are some reforms, especially in the tax system, that have to be done so that the country can grow faster and bigger. And they won't be done because of the difficulties in the political system. And also, the constitution has to be changed because the constitution makes the government have too little discretion in using its revenues. So the government can only invest a very small amount of its revenue to help the progress, economic progress. If you don't change the constitution, if you don't change the tax structure, Brazil will never grow fast as China does or indeed, and I don't think we are going to have this change.
But the foreign investment is secure. There are excellent relations overseas. Trade is not a problem. But generally, the economy is going reasonably well.
Yeah, the economy is going reasonably well. We know that Brazil is a big country with a huge population. The emerging middle classes make Brazil a very attractive country for consumer goods, especially. And people are coming to Brazil and investing here. And I think this will not change either. What I think is important is to level the expectation. For instance, the Economist, the very good magazine, The Economist. A couple of years ago, they showed Brazil as new China.
Right.
They had that famous cover
Yes.
of the
Right.
cover as a rocket. And a couple of weeks ago, they showed the same rocket going down, exploding. It was not true then. It's not true now. Brazil is not exploding, and Brazil was not a
Yeah.
rocket.
They exaggerated. They
They
exaggerated.
exaggerated both times. And if you are an investor and you want to come to Brazil, I would say come. Come because you are going to do big business, good business. But don't come if you think you are going to have a 9% a year of growth. Some sectors of the economy, for instance, the cosmetics, They have been growing 12% a year for many, many years, but that's very specific. The economy as a whole will not grow that fast, I think, never.
Okay. Now, the last thing mentioned that in the street demonstrations back in June and July, about which people complained a great deal in Brazil, was corruption. What's happened there? Has the government done anything to limit, regulate, control corruption? What is your view?
What happened in June was that exactly at that time, a little bit before the demonstrations, and that was one of the reasons for the demonstration, the Supreme Court decided that a group of defendants in the most important corruption case in the Brazilian history would be trialed again. They had been convicted, so jail terms, but they appealed, and the Supreme Court decided that they would be tried again.
Right. Excuse me, let me just interrupt for our people who are watching who may not know that this is a case in which legislators were bribed by the government to get their votes, and it carried the delicious label of the monthly, the Mensalão. I thought that was delightful. Anyway, that's what the case was about. Please forgive the interruption. Go ahead.
That's okay. Context is essential. And this case involved the second most powerful person in the government at that time, 2004, Mr. Ricardo Silva. So, when the Supreme Court decided to accept the appeal, most people, including myself, had the impression that once again the case would be forgotten and they would not be put in jail. However, the Chief Justice of Brazil is a very decided person. And when the Supreme Court took the case again this week, he decided that although the appeal will be heard and trialed, for those crimes that there is no appeal, the defendant should start making their conviction in jail. So he decided that probably today or next week, those people will be put in jail, at least during the night, because the crimes that do not have appeal, there is no possibility for appeal, they are not as bad, as grave as the others. So they can spend the day outside jail, but they have to sleep in the jail. If that happens, I think the mood in the jail regarding people who are corrupt and are never punished for that will change a lot, and I think the political environment can change a lot for the better as well.
Well, you've changed from a pessimist to an optimist just as I listen to you speak. That's a very optimistic. Let's hope you're correct. Certainly, it has enormous symbolic value inside Brazil and out, and we'll see what happens. Carlos Eduardo Lins da Silva, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you. We look forward to doing so again soon.
Thank you, Joe. The pleasure is mine.